Oh boy, they're really leaning into that Pinocchio symbolism this time. Episode 3 of this volume is the episode of let's respond to every single criticism that's ever been lobbed at this show now. I actually like this episode more than I didn't like it, but in this review we're going to focus mostly on this main thing that I didn't like, which is how Rooster Teeth handled criticisms that have been lobbed at the show, both in the last volume and throughout its history. Because I think that the way that they handle criticism and address it feels too, direct, it feels too mathematical, and I'll explain why by showing various examples throughout this episode. As with previous reviews, we're going to go through plot stuff, theme stuff, and character stuff, as we usually do, but it's going to be couched in this analysis of the kind of responses to the criticisms that Rooster Teeth have been making. Let's talk about the plot though. A lot happened this time, and it's all really interesting stuff. This episode seems like entirely intended to set up the possibility and the eventuality that Watts will take over Penny. They're so heavy-handed with it, in fact, that it almost seems like a bait and switch. These pieces are so clearly set up. You have the Aesop stealing her sword, Polendina remoting into her, and, a slew of Penny Watts speaking in full Shakespeare Hamlet tongue.
If you can't beat them, then make them join you.
Strongly implies that this plan is gonna go through. They already showed that Penny can be controlled and that Watts already has a mechanism through which to control her. It's almost obvious that she's gonna get taken over, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I'm glad they're putting in all the setup. My only thing is, now it just seems like she's definitely gonna die again or something like that. She's practically hiding another death flag in her spinal prison wallet. I'm trademarking that phrase, don't tell anybody. Actually, tell everybody, that's how they'll know. There was so much setup in this episode just about Penny. So let's talk about Penny's character in the context of all of this setup stuff. People in this episode, and in general, are weirdly prejudiced towards her, and I don't understand where it's coming from. Both May Marigold and Harriet called her I don't want to call it a slur. It's not, there's no robot N-word, but said mean stuff to her. May called her Robo Girl and Harriet called her Tin Can. And no response on Twitter is to be found. I searched. Nobody cares about anti-robot oppression. We have to get out in front of this oppression that's gonna definitely happen in the future towards robots so that we can make sure that Mega Man is able to get a mortgage. I think May Marigold's perspective or weird feelings towards Penny might be justified, or I'm reading too much into it. It was just a snide comment because she's really sarcastic. But it would make sense if she didn't like Penny, since Penny's technically part of the Atlas military. She's probably just sassy though, I'm probably reading too much into it. Harriet though, makes me feel like there actually is some kind of broader prejudice towards robots. The only time I've seen people use derogatory or mean names about other people are with Faunus, calling them animals, or Penny. It doesn't happen to any other group. Nothing bad has even really happened to black people in RWBY. It's not even a thing, I think. Then again, Ironwood is becoming more and more robot, and for one reason or another, no one has yet to call him Tin Can, though he could have those people shot for saying that, so don't be racist to the guy pointing a gun at your face. But speaking of people of color, let's talk about Watts. Watts is almost definitely going to betray Ironwood. I think we all called this going into the volume. It would be almost stupid of him not to. That Hamlet line at the end, where he goes all Bond villain without the threateningness, heavily implies that what Watts is doing is he's going to take control of Penny and then use Penny to get the relic or kill Ironwood or something like that. And in essence, he's kind of made Ironwood join him, except Ironwood thinks that Watts is the one joining him, when it's really the other way around. This brings me to my real point, which is that Ironwood is an idiot. Watts is making it so obvious that he's gonna betray Ironwood. He keeps saying shit you'd hear from a Sherlock Holmes villain, oh ho ho, the master or the pupil, which am I? Perhaps in the future Ironwood shall die. And Ironwood's yeah, as long as you fill your end of the bargain, Like, did you just hear him? Did you just hear what he said? Were you listening to what he just said? He practically just said he was going to kill you. And then Ironwood's like, well, I made an order. I mean, if he wants something after that, you know, he wants it. What are you going to do? This is why Ironwood's semblance is so stupid. It's not even like metal in the sense that, you know, he'll do whatever it takes to do something by like looking at the situation and being relentless in his like study of what to do. His semblance just burns aura so that he can bang his head into a wall and then act with the intelligence of an NFL player who's, you know, crashed their head into the floor 800 million times and gets ruptured blood vessels in their brain every time they put their hand on a powered-on washing machine. To summarize this point, if you're going to be racist towards robots, do it to Ironwood. The main bulk of this episode revolves around the fight that takes place in what I can only imagine is leftovers from the set of Star Wars. And I think they did really well with it overall. Like, I thought it was really cool and intense. And you could feel the stakes of the fight. Like, if Penny lost, she would just be immediately captured. And then, you know, they would do God knows what with her. And this fight also showed Penny's strength of character as well. She's very willing to defend her friends and was willing to put her life on the line, which will probably come back to bite her later on. This fight also brings up the interesting question of how strong the Aesops are. I know that RWBY isn't a show that cares about power scaling or anything of that nature at all, since it took like, 3 weeks for these student huntsmen to defeat the Aesops in Volume 7. But when Marrow said they were holding back, I was like, are you trying to throw in that wrench now? Because it feels like they're walking back the idea of Team RWBY being stronger than the Aesops. The only plausible argument for them holding back was the idea that they weren't using proper teamwork in that specific moment when they fought Team RWBY, which would constitute them holding back because Team RWBY's teamwork was better. And I guess since then they went on a corporate retreat to do team building exercises at like a rock climbing gym, and 30 trust falls later they have the teamwork of identical twins. They are kind of stupid regardless of their teamwork though, because Marrow took forever to use Stay, and I think I know why. The only reason I could imagine him not using Stay sooner is that by the end of the episode, he says some things like he can't hold her much longer, which means that the stronger the opponent is, the harder it is for him to hold. So weakening her first makes complete sense, and that would totally work. But he could just keep repeatedly using Stay and then having people hit her, right? Also, Harriet is such an asshole. She really is like the hare from the Tortoise and the Hare story. That rabbit was such a bitch. Like, he was talking trash for the whole race and then lost anyway, which is basically what happened between Harriet and RWBY. So I really don't like her or Elm. I feel like I've made that pretty clear. Like, they're both kind of mean to people in general. But enough about the Aesop. I think that putting aside, you know, my minor quibbles with the power scaling, I think that this fight had a really good flow to it, and some of the moves that Harriet especially was throwing were really cool and felt really like fluid and impactful. And if the fights for the rest of the volume are going to be like this, then I'm all for it. I know this review series is really trying to focus in on character and theme, but I realize that this show is at its strongest when there's just cool action and I can turn my brain off and let it go on vacation. But speaking of character, let's talk about my favorite character this episode, besides Penny, I guess. Nora. I'm so glad Nora finally evolved to Super Saiyan 3. All it took was realizing she doesn't need a man, which is good. I think that the writers finally separating Ren and Nora is a big step forward, and it opens up a really expansive new avenue for both of their characters. I think that that conversation between Blake, Weiss, and Nora is indicative of a very broad problem I have with RWBY and its characters. Everything they say to each other sounds like self-help book advice. Like, listen to this sentence.
When you've been at someone's side for so long, after a while they become a part of you. Don't forget about the rest.
That is such a platitude, and that is such broad and not helpful advice. You could have found it in like a cereal box full of fortune cookies. Nora would have got more out of that conversation if, you know, Blake told her that her lucky numbers are like 8, 7, and 451. I don't like that character moments in RWBY oftentimes are people being like, hey, you're a person, go find yourself, go be yourself. It's okay to feel how you feel. Like, that's the first part of a meaningful conversation between friends, but it feels like that part of the conversation either goes on for too long or is the entire conversation. In a show like The Last Airbender, those kinds of character flaw revelation moments and discussions I think would play out a lot differently because, let's take Katara as an example. She had the flaw of being like too bossy and too helicoptery with her friends, and at some point they mention that, and it's not even that she got rid of it entirely, more than it is she toned it down and recontextualized it to be the kind of leader, mother figure that she becomes by the end of the series. So her character progression feels a lot more organic, and it's not so much that she's quote-unquote fixing flaws in herself, like becoming a strictly better person, more than it is she's becoming more of herself in a way that other people can get behind. Whereas the character moments in RWBY feel like, here is a criticism that fans have given of the show, we are going to address said criticism. Nora's character arc in this episode in particular, or this particular element of her character arc, feels like a direct response to Renora criticism. And it feels very much like a plug-in, like, oh, here's the criticism, this is our answer. And it's woven into the plot in a way that feels inorganic. This is why it felt so weak when Yang's PTSD seemingly disappeared and only seemed to pop up in moments where it was like convenient for her and Blake's relationship. Her PTSD was only there as like a wingman so that she could get in Blake's pants, I guess. It worked though, so I'm not gonna knock the hustle. Getting back to Nora, I really like the be strong, hit stuff thing to a certain degree because I think it's leaning into the good parts of her character, and the purpose of that moment where she knocks the door down after she says be strong and hit stuff was to show that she was taking ownership over who she is. I hope that leads to more character depth in the future where she can say be strong, hit stuff, and have a personality, but let's do it one step at a time. I hope they have a similar moment with Ren where he has his own be strong and hit stuff moment. Instead for him it's like, be quiet and lose fights. The other character I want to talk about in this episode is RWBY, because she's kind of revealing now how not smart she is, and the writers are openly acknowledging it, I hope. Her goal is to be a leader. At least that's how her character arc is set up, is for her to become a better leader. And I think they're responding to the criticism that RWBY seems like not really a leader and more of a speech giver, and alcoholic make fun of her. So I want to see how they play out her not really knowing things like what her semblance does, since literally everybody else knows what their semblance does. It feels like Rooster Teeth is correcting the vagueness around her semblance in real time, perhaps in order to set up something she's going to do with her semblance later on, maybe in tandem with Jean's semblance. But on the flip side, I think they're doing a really good job with showing RWBY's empathy for other people. Her and Penny's relationship really exemplifies that RWBY cares about other people and is looking out for everyone as an individual and as a collective, which hopefully will later on lead to her becoming a better leader for it. The end of the episode where Penny says this,
"It is time for me to go,"
feels so real and well done. Like, it actually hurt to hear her say that, and it was really endearing when RWBY hugged her and, said what she said to her, which is yet another death flag in the spinal prison wallet. But it's also a good character moment, so let me not ruin it by being an asshole. I hope RWBY has this level of empathy when she's having her inevitable conversation with Yang about their little fallout. So to close out real quick, let's talk about theme and then what might be being set up in the next episodes. This episode leans into the idea of Ironwood treating people around him as pawns. Like Salem, nobody is really on his side because they want to be, really. It feels like they have to be. Maybe the Aesops, because they actually think they're doing the right thing. But his takeover of Penny is indicative of what he actually feels about subordinates. Like, whether or not Penny chooses to be on his side, he wants her to be on his side. I think that level of character in Ironwood may cause Winter in the long run to defect. And maybe even the Aesops might defect, specifically Marrow, because Ironwood is only sowing more division by having this way of controlling people. In fact, I thought it was a very apt symbol that Ironwood took Penny's sword. He took nothing like, her hand or her head or anything like that. Not that that would have been cool, because then she would just be dead. But the fact that he took her sword, I think, symbolizes that he only needs her as a weapon, and the only part of her that's relevant to him is her military potential. Of course, he wants to secure the relic, but if we're talking about just his relationship with Penny, he knows in his own mind that she's the protector of Mantle, and that's all she is to him. So him taking her sword to use her as a sword feels very apt as a symbolic reference. The last point I want to make is about Penny's weakness to electricity, possibly. After Nora knocks down the door and Penny, holds her up, this happens. And this tells me that the writers are setting up the idea that Penny is weak to electricity. So it's possible that if she changes to Ironwood's side, that the team might defeat her or kill her or whatever with some form of electricity. Maybe even Nora's semblance. Perhaps Nora overcharges both of them at the same time, and then while Penny's paralyzed, knocks her out. Also, real quick, I feel like Ren and Nora are gonna break up, and I hope they don't. Despite everything, I still ship them. I know this is a stupid point to end on, but I think that they have a chance, and their kiss last season was immaculate. So I hope they find themselves and move on. Overall, I thought this episode was really good in terms of the progression of Rooster Teeth's writing and stuff. Yes, it comes off as heavy-handed, and very heavy-handed at that, and it seems a little formulaic in the sense that it feels like they heard criticism and just addressed criticism directly in like a 1-2 fashion without much subtlety. But at this point in the story, it's kind of the best they can do to catch up, and I'm mostly concerned with the payoffs to these setups, as opposed to whether or not the setups were subtle at the end of the day. But comment, I want to hear what you people have to say about the writing style and how subtle or not subtle Rooster Teeth is being, and whether or not it kills your enjoyment of the show for them to be so blatant in their writing choices and responses to criticism. But that does it for this video. Thanks for watching. I'm gonna put out my review for episode 4 really soon, so look forward to that, because hopefully we can have a little more thematic juice for next time.